I recently talked about the most dangerous cities in the United States, and while they are pretty scary places, they pale in comparison to some of the places around the world, like Venezuela, which is known for having the highest crime rate in the world. But what if it's not just crime? What if the government itself was just as unstable as some of these gangs and rebel groups running around trying to rule their countries? Welcome back to FinnaTravel. Today we're going to go over the most dangerous countries in the world, especially for US citizens, or pretty much any Westerner or person living in a peaceful country where people live in decency with each other and are for the most part civil. The Department of State has this pretty cool website where you can check out the travel advisories for each country with levels 1 to 4, denoting relatively how safe it is to travel there. Level 1 being the safest, where you just use your common sense and watch out for purse thieves and pickpockets, and Level 4 being the most dangerous with a strict do not travel warning. There are currently 19 countries listed at Level 4, and we'll be going over the worst of these in addition to Israel. Although Israel itself isn't a Level 4, Gaza is most definitely listed as do not travel, so we'll include it on our list because of the recent conflicts that you have obviously heard about by now. Unless you're extremely sheltered or maybe just came out of a coma. If so, welcome back. I'm glad you're still here and joining us to find out why these countries are so treacherous. Number 10. Syria. There was probably never a time in all of history when the land of Syria wasn't in some sort of conflict. It was once home to a major trading hub along the Silk Road. You remember that ancient network of trade routes that we all kind of forgot about from high school history. Anyway, Syria has been in wars for centuries, and still is today, where they remain in a vicious civil war since 2011 that has claimed over 300,000 civilian lives. The Syrian government and military have been accused of widespread atrocities, including chemical weapons use on their own people. Aerial bombing of civilian areas, kidnapping, and terrorism remain constant threats, but not just to Syrian civilians. U.S. citizens are targets of abduction or unjust detention by the Syrian government, as well as targets by competing factions. Here's what the Department of State says on their website about Syria. Our ability to provide consular assistance to individuals who are injured or kidnapped, or to the families of individuals who die in the conflict, is extremely limited. It's true that the humanitarian crisis in Syria is one of the worst in recent history. Yes, even more than Gaza right now, which we'll talk about in a moment. And while there are some of you that may want to head over there to lend a hand, it's probably not the best decision, as you'll undoubtedly become just another statistic. Number 9. South Sudan. If you haven't been following world affairs in recent years, or if you graduated from high school or college more than 10 years ago, you may not have even known that South Sudan was a country. South Sudan was born out of one of the longest conflicts in Sudan since the 1950s, when the people of the region overwhelmingly voted to secede from Sudan in 2011. Fun fact, it's actually the youngest country in the world. But ever since its independence, it's been completely unstable, mired in its own brutal civil war and widespread atrocities being committed by all sides. I wonder now if we're going to have a South Sudan. Famine, disease, and the collapse of public services have only served to compound the crisis. Armed groups target civilians, foreign workers, and aid workers with impunity. Yeah, that includes Americans. There's a lot of oil, natural resources, and fertile land that only seem to contribute to the never-ending conflicts. The Department of State puts it this way. Armed conflict is ongoing and includes fighting between various political and ethnic groups. Weapons are readily available to the population. In addition, cattle raids occur throughout the country and often lead to violence. So, add cow theft at gunpoint to your list of reasons not to visit South Sudan. Number 8. Yemen. Since 2014, Yemen has been embroiled in a devastating civil war between the internationally recognized government, supported by a Saudi-led coalition, and Iran-backed Houthi rebels, who, by the way, are also attacking Israel in the Gaza war. Both sides vying for control of the country and committing vicious war crimes and blowing up basic infrastructure like housing, power, water, and medical facilities and schools. With so many brazen attacks on civilians, it makes any humanitarian aid virtually impossible. Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates remain active, regularly attacking civilians. And get this, there are landmines throughout Yemen. So even if somehow you were able to make it there and avoid all direct conflict with these insurgent groups, you might unknowingly run over a landmine on your way back to the airport. And if you think your dual citizenship will get you in and out of there without problems, you might want to hear this. The Department of State says, there is a very high risk of kidnapping and detention of U.S. citizens in Yemen, particularly dual U.S. Yemeni citizens. Young people are also at risk of kidnapping for purposes of forced marriage. I bet that wasn't on your travel plans. Number 7. Venezuela. Just like the previous 3 countries, Venezuela has its fair share of political and social unrest. But on top of all that, they also have the highest crime rate in the entire world. As a major hub for illicit drugs, and a country whose law enforcement is known to be as effective as our politicians, Violent crimes in Venezuela, such as homicide, armed robbery, kidnapping, and carjacking, are as common as a bird targeting your windshield.
Oh, bird pooped on your shoulder. No, wait. Pooped on your head, then dripped onto your shoulder.
And if you're thinking, I'll be fine because I'm definitely not traveling to Venezuela, you may want to take a look around you. Not only have Venezuelans been fleeing the country in the millions due to the political and social unrest, many Venezuelan gang members have been entering the United States and coming into your neighborhood in the last few years. Ever since Biden took office and appointed Alejandro Mayorkas as Secretary of Homeland Security, we've had over 500,000 illegal immigrants from Venezuela enter the country, second only to Mexico. You remember Laken Riley? She was a young college student with a bright future that was brutally murdered right here in the United States by a violent Venezuelan illegal immigrant who has ties to a gang from his homeland. So while Venezuela is clearly an unsafe country to visit, how soon will it be until Canada advises its citizens not to travel to the United States? Number 6, Burkina Faso. Now, before you think I'm making up country names just to fill up my list, I promise this place is real. It's a landlocked country in West Africa, which unfortunately has one of the highest poverty rates in the world. Burkina Faso.
That's kind of fun to say.
The name means land of honest men. More like honestly terrifying men. Burkina Faso is one of the worst places on our list to visit because it holds the highest ranking on the global terrorism list. Yes, even above Israel, with the recent Hamas incident killing over 1,200 lives in early 2024. In 2023, Burkina Faso had 258 incidents of terrorism, including over 1,900 fatalities. Insurgent groups have staged frequent attacks on civilians, security forces, and Westerners. They don't want you coming there any more than they love their neighboring countries. They operate with increasing impunity in the north and east near its borders with Mali and Niger. With the constant terrorist attacks, no place is safe in Burkina Faso, and the Department of State warns that terrorists may conduct attacks anywhere with little or no warning. Targets could include hotels, restaurants, police stations, customs offices, areas at or near mining sites, places of worship, military posts, and schools. Might as well live in Japan with all its earthquakes. At least you'll know you're not being targeted. Number 5, Ukraine. Now, just because you may feel justified in going to Ukraine to help its citizens who are being invaded and bombarded by Russia doesn't mean it's a good idea. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has led to Europe's largest land war since World War II, with attacks happening all over the country. There have been reports of Russian forces targeting U.S. citizens for arrest and detainment in order to interrogate them and harass them because of their nationality. They have been accused of widespread atrocities against civilians that are too awful to even name, but you can go look them up if you're so inclined to. Even though the government here isn't likely to kidnap you or wrongfully detain you, they have more important things to do than processing your visa. So, unless you want to be remembered as a casualty of the war or become a Russian POW like your grandpa was in World War II, I'd stay far away from the Ukraine and just keep sending blankets instead. Number 4, Iran. You know, I heard that Iran has no Walmarts, only Targets.
That's a joke, isn't it?
In fact, I might even get arrested for saying something like that in Iran. Their human rights record is among the worst in the world, with widespread censorship and political repression. The country's support for extremist groups and its pursuit of nuclear weapons has also raised serious concerns in the international community, not to mention their recent attack on Israel in retaliation for losing 2 generals, one of whom was on Hezbollah's Shura Council. Now, I know Iran has some pretty incredible places, and visiting them may seem tempting, and some people even travel here for surrogacy tourism. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Apparently that's a thing now, where individuals in countries like America that can't have kids go to foreign countries to hire a surrogate because apparently it's cheaper. Well, it's enough that the Department of State had to warn about that. Companies offering surrogacy services in Iran are misrepresenting the security situation in Iran and the risks of the unregulated surrogacy tourism industry. While I sympathize with those unable to have children, as this affected my wife and I for a number of years, there's a whole world out there of safer countries. There's only one right answer for this question. What did you do when a private Iranian company offered you surrogacy services? Iran. Number 3, Haiti. Is it no surprise that everyone wants their slice of the Caribbean? It's gorgeous down in Haiti and truly a paradise for many people, but this nation has been plagued by political instability, poverty, and natural disasters since, well, forever. Kidnapping for ransom is rampant in Port-au-Prince and outlying areas, with victims regularly including U.S. citizens. Kidnappers are very sophisticated and have been known to plan attacks on entire convoys. Many American citizens have been held in ransom, and families have paid thousands of dollars for their release. Aside from far too many dictatorships, coups, and gang violence, just like in Venezuela, the amount of earthquakes and hurricanes Haiti sees is just unfair. Constantly beat on all sides, Haitians are poor and often surviving day to day, or more like storm to storm. Take it from me, Haiti is not a good place to go visit right now. Here's the official word from our government. Protests, demonstrations, tire burning, and roadblocks are frequent, unpredictable, and can turn violent. The U.S. government is extremely limited in its ability to provide emergency services to U.S. citizens in Haiti. If you must visit the Caribbean, try Turks and Caicos or the British Virgin Islands. Number 2. Afghanistan. If you remember correctly, the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda that thrived under the Taliban government was responsible for the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001. And the United States assisted in keeping that terrorist organization at bay for 20 years. But not that long ago, we pulled our troops out without leaving a residual force, and guess what? The Taliban is now in control of the country again. Ever since they reclaimed power back in 2021, Afghanistan has faced a spiral of economic collapse, food insecurity, and human rights abuses. Terrorist groups continue to regularly attack civilians. The Taliban has imposed severe restrictions on women's rights and civil liberties, with U.S. citizens facing the highest risks of kidnapping, violence, and unjust detention. Even aid and humanitarian workers are under attack.
If they want to be upset at someone, they should actually just be upset at the American government, who spent years weakening Afghanistan for them and then just left them with hundreds of weapons and hundreds of tanks so that they could take over. So kind of us. Really just blame us for all of your struggles.
Here's what our government recommends. U.S. citizens should not travel to Afghanistan for any reason. If you choose to disregard the travel advisory, maybe you're a missionary and feel called to go. There's a list of helpful tips on the Department of State's website for you to follow. Just make sure it's not for something trivial like picking up the world's finest saffron or visiting the Band-e-Amir National Park. Number 1. Russia. Well, it doesn't take a college degree to know why you shouldn't visit Russia. Unless you've been living under a rock or weren't paying attention to the earlier part of the video when I talked about Ukraine, you know that Russia declared war and launched an unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. Remember, even if we're not technically at war with Russia, they are in a state of war and they see any alliance with Ukraine as hostile. As an American citizen traveling to Russia, you're opening yourself up to detention, interrogation, and harassment at the very least by Russian security officials. Even if you're a dual national, they may deny your access to U.S. consular services and prevent your departure from the country. In short, they are at war and you are the enemy. As a result, there are many unforeseen and unpredictable consequences of traveling to Russia, not to mention the fact that your credit and debit cards no longer work there due to sanctions on Russian banks. Since their rapid invasion back in 2022, they've even lost a lot of ground, so they may even be grumpier than usual with you visiting their land. If you really want to visit the Red Square, try again when the war is over. You'll have a much better visit. As I mentioned at the beginning, Israel is classified differently than the rest of these locations. It has a level of other, meaning you should reconsider travel to the nation as a whole, but do not travel to Gaza. On October 7, 2023, Hamas crossed over their Palestinian border into Israel and slaughtered 1,200 innocent people and took 242 prisoners hostage in one of the most brazen and deadly terrorist attacks in recent history. I lived in Israel for a number of years, including during the entire Gulf War. While I was a bit on edge, I never felt truly terrified or feared for my life because I lived near Jerusalem, where the Dome of the Rock is. And that's a sacred site for the Muslims. So no one really believes Saddam Hussein would attack Jerusalem. If I were living in Israel now, I'd probably feel a little bit more unsafe than I did back then, just because of how unstable everything is and how close the enemy is. Until Hamas is completely rooted out of Gaza and the people can begin to heal from the Islamic terrorists that continue to use them as human shields, I don't see terrorist attacks stopping anywhere in Israel anytime soon. So I would follow the Department of State's advice on this one. Terrorists and violent extremists may attack with little or no warning, targeting tourist locations, transportation hubs, markets, shopping malls, and local government facilities. If you had to travel to any one of these countries for some reason, which one would you pick and why? Let me know in the comments. I hope you learned something today, or at least entertained a little. If you enjoyed this video even half as much as I did researching, writing, recording, and editing it, be sure to share it with a friend. And thanks for watching.